My job title used to be very simple. It used to just be Senior Teaching Fellow, and it's now extended to lots and lots of words in a row. But most of the work that I've been doing in terms of research in EDI has been apprenticeship recruitment. And then moving on to what's actually happening to people once they come onto the programme. Apprenticeships were originally set up in the higher education sector as a way to improve social mobility. Now, what we've found that is happening is that actually a lot of the same people who were studying degrees anyway are converting to apprenticeships rather than an expansion into, let's say, pools of candidates, to talk about it in a cold way, who maybe wouldn't have accessed higher education before. There's a problem there in terms of the traditional barriers that people face in getting onto programs, understanding the university life, the university journey, the sector, and those problems have unfortunately been replicated in apprenticeships. So the first part of this talk, I'm going to give a slightly longer explanation of some of the work that I did in the initial part of the project, which was funded by the Ignite Network and also the EDI Plus Fellowship, both of which focused on the energy research sector. But the reason for focusing on apprenticeships was to try and understand if people were able to get round those barriers that might be to do with cost, to do with access, to do with understanding the sector, if apprenticeships were really helping with that. And then through that, hopefully understand that our apprenticeships giving people that pathway towards energy research. And Simone is right about the kind of backlash to EDI that's happening in some places, and in other places it's much more of a positive focus and an improving situation. But I find that whenever I'm talking about EDI, if I talk about social mobility and apprenticeships, that seems to get a lot more traction and a lot more people interested than saying EDI for energy research. I think social mobility is understood much more in terms of how do you get working class people involved in things that were traditionally middle class. That seems to be something that people are very comfortable with and very happy that should happen. So it's maybe just a continued persuasion to get other underrepresented groups understood in the same way. So it's not something that I would say is a sort of fixed problem. It moves and it changes with time, and particularly with politics. But I think there is something around the language that we use to get people more involved. EDI by stealth, which is something is maybe a bit uncomfortable. We shouldn't be ashamed of what we're doing at all. We shouldn't have to hide it. But also people are turned off from certain ways of working that might discriminate against, let's say, white males. There's a misunderstanding about what EDI is trying to do, but there are ways to explain it that can get people on board. And once you've kind of hooked them in, we can talk a bit more and make them understand the whole problem. So back to the research project that I've been doing. So apprenticeships were for social mobility, or partly for social mobility, also to improve economic output and to improve training in the workforce, that kind of thing. But the cohorts are not diverse. They're less diverse than traditional full-time programs, and I've got a couple of stats from Scotland to show you. Coupled with that, retention on these programs has also been an issue. So apprenticeships are difficult. It's the same academic level as other degrees, other undergraduate degrees or postgraduate degrees, but they're working at the same time. So they might do a reduced amount of credits, but they also have to learn to the same level academically that we expect from traditional full-time students. So there was a real problem in the first few years, and it's still a problem now, where people come onto the program not quite fully understanding what it is and how difficult it's going to be and how academic it is. And then they end up struggling while they're on the program, focusing much more on their jobs because they get that day-to-day satisfaction of doing their jobs. And then they struggle with the university part of the program. So cohorts aren't diverse, and retention and success on the programs are an issue. And I think that everyone in the room will understand how those two things can be coupled. Another aspect that's important to think about is the access to these in terms of employers are now quite powerful in terms of the access to universities. And also there has been a bit of a middle class grab of apprenticeship places. And I'll come on to some of the reasons why. The way I talk about this to employers is I tend to talk about what's the impact of apprenticeships, what's it doing for your organisation, what's it doing for the people that are undertaking them, and then are they delivering on social mobility? And I find that talking to employers in that way makes them understand the benefits of a more diverse applicant pool, a more diverse cohort on programme. If you talk about it in those business terms, and there are problems, of course, with talking about EDI fully in business terms, but it has to be part of the argument, I think, to win people over and persuade them and get them understanding the benefits of thinking about things like inclusion, culture, that sort of thing. The slides have stopped there, mine. I'm not quite sure what to do. So I'm going to stand here as if I don't know how to work a laptop.
Sorry, everyone.
Oh, there we, yes, there we go.
This one?
That one there.
There we go. I don't know how to make it back.
That's all right. I'll do it.
Thank
It's
you.
okay. Now, is the screen still being shared? Can people online still see the slides? It looks like it, the little red box is round it. So thank you. Thanks for that. So to look at it in its most stark way, this is our apprenticeship program. So the program that I have been running since 2019 when it was launched. We started with 20 blokes in a room and no females, which was really stark right from the induction. I have to be honest to say it was not something I really noticed until the students came on campus. And then a few females were nominated for the program.
Oh, I haven't looked at the slides.
No,
sorry, it's that I sent that's that EDI.
So there, where was I? There was basically a room full of blokes, and then a few females got nominated for the program. And the way the apprenticeships work is that employers employ, and then they nominate for the university degree. Now, by that point, we've had a few conversations with them, so we've looked at qualifications and that kind of thing. So there is a bit of back and forth before they actually get nominated. But essentially, the employers decide who's joining the program, and we say okay or not based on their academic achievements in the past. You could look at these numbers going from the bottom of the slide to the top to say that there is better representation of females on the program, but really the number is hovering around pretty bad, I would say. I should have the stats for 24-25, but there's the UK national, the Scottish national stats only go up to 22-23, and it gets quite confusing when you go beyond that. The full-time programme in civil engineering, which is traditionally male-dominated, is on the other side of the slide. And again, it's improved by 3%, but really it's not improved. We hover around 20%. What we found is when we recruit greater numbers of students, we still have the same ratio between male and female that join the programme. The ratios for various ethnicities, various races is terrible as well. There's a handful of people on the programme who are not white males, basically. But the apprenticeship's even worse than that. And that's the programme that I've been recruiting to for years. And there's a clear problem there. How do we improve that? And why is it worse in an apprenticeship? Why is it worse when the jobs are advertised? Lots of reasons why. To give you a flavour of what's happening over the whole of Scotland, there is a much reduced number of apprenticeship frameworks, they call it, but basically subject areas to study in Scotland. You can do a couple in business, a couple in software, a few in engineering, some in accounting as well, all relevant to the energy sector, of course, in different ways. This is the male-female split overall for all subjects in the black box. And you can see it's pretty male dominated. And interestingly, in the first year, it was more male dominated than it is now. But when you break that down into STEM subjects, it's even worse. And it started off around about the same because of the number of frameworks in terms of the ratio to male to female for STEM and non-STEM. But as the number of frameworks increased, STEM was left behind and the rest improved slightly. So you could draw an optimistic best fit line through 2017 all the way to 2023 and say that it's improving slightly. But I think that's basically hovering around the same number to me. So to look at it in a different way in terms of, rather than split for male, female, you don't have to look at all the numbers on that slide, but if you look at the total number of early leavers of a percentage of apprenticeship students, I should say GA students means degree apprentice students in Scotland. It's just the name that was given to it in Scotland. It's called graduate apprenticeship in Scotland, but they're not graduates, and some people argue they're not even apprentices. So we'll call them apprenticeship degree students, I think, to make it a bit clearer. There's a huge number that are dropping out, around about 40% in the first few years. The 21-22 and 22-23 figures are old and out of date, but that's when in Scotland they stopped publicising the figures. So we have these figures in public bodies, but funding changes meant that Skills Development Scotland no longer control this. It all comes through a different funding body, the same funding body for all undergraduate programs, so they stopped reporting on it. So it might look like there's a big drop in people that leave early as you get to 21-22 and 22-23, but that's probably because they haven't had a chance to fail yet. I think universities are getting better at explaining what apprenticeships are and supporting the students on the programme, but definitely not to the level that you can see on the slide there. I'll come back to the problem with this data set being so out of date later on. So the first part of research, and the title has disappeared from that slide, but it was about pathways for access to the energy research sector. And the first thing that we did was interview employers. So 9 employers came forward, and they were of different sizes and different structures. So they had people who worked for sort of large public bodies, people who were working for large consultancy firms, large contractors, and we also had smaller companies who were maybe about 20 to 50 people, one person tasked with doing recruitment, that sort of thing. And because of those different structures, we had very different people who we were interviewing. So some were professional HR people, so they were used to doing recruitment and that sort of thing. Others were just engineers who had been asked to go and find an apprentice, or who had persuaded their company that it's a good idea for us to get an apprentice so that we can train them up, keep them, and that kind of thing. So we asked about those decisions. Why do you recruit an apprentice? How do you target people? Are you recruiting? What's the strategy for recruiting? And those results were quite revealing. So the reasons for recruiting an apprentice were many and varied. There were competitive advantages to try and get people in at an early age and train them up in your way of working, which is easy to understand. And also, there were people's competitors were doing it, so they thought, well, what is this apprenticeship thing? We better get involved, because nobody wants to miss out. Nobody wants to be left behind in their business. Other reasons for recruiting were to try and get new talent into the company as well. They were trying to do something different to what they'd done in the past, so they were kind of buying into the apprenticeship thing of get someone in and train them up as they're studying. But the upshot of all that is that people are targeting new recruits. There's a number of people get nominated for the programs who are already in employment, but companies are targeting new recruits. So there is an opportunity there to diversify the workforce in more ways than one. But a big problem that we found was that smaller companies where an engineer was tasked with recruiting tended to use things like informal word of mouth for advertising. So they would talk to their friends and their families, and they would turn up at a school maybe. So it was a school that their kids went to, or their nephew went to, and they would turn up and talk and present, which is a good thing, right? It's nice to go and share this knowledge with the school children. But what school children are you sharing this knowledge with? They're the people that live in your area. They're the people that go to the schools that are probably quite expensive in terms of buying a house, living in that place and sending your kid to that school. So it's really it's a kind of a postcode battle in Scotland to try and get your kid into a good school, is that you buy an expensive house. And I'm sure it's similar problems elsewhere. So by doing these informal processes, they were kind of reinforcing the same problems in basically presenting to themselves, if you look at it from an EDI focus. The decision making in big companies tended to be done by lots of people. But the decision making in small companies tended to be only through a kind of one person, one man deciding who gets to join the program. So there's a real problem there in terms of getting people in that you like, getting people in that you have some kind of affinity with. And we've known about these problems in recruitment for a long time, but they still seem to happen in some places. But as I say, bigger companies know some of these things and know how to recruit in a better way. Gut feeling was something that came out in more than one of the respondents, or more than one of the interviewees. And that's a real problem for all the biases that we know that we all carry around and have to overcome. If you're using gut feeling to recruit, it's really not a good thing when you get to the national scale. Lots of people using their gut instincts in terms of who am I going to employ. We asked them about organizational culture, and of course, culture is something that is a big talking point in terms of universities, but also in terms of companies. People understand that to be inclusive and to try and work well, you need to have a good culture, but that can also work the other way. So some of the comments around culture were around making sure people fit into our culture, which is problematic, because if people don't fit into your culture, then you're not going to employ them. That means that you might have suspicions about people, your biases that you're not aware of. All of that comes together along with the gut feeling to bringing in someone who's exactly like you, people who already have power. The next stage of the same project was to survey the students. So we surveyed 121 full-time students and 35 apprenticeship students. Now, part of the problem of the apprenticeship scene in Scotland is people not really being aware of what it is. So we asked them, could you describe an apprenticeship, sorry. And of the people that had turned up to do a civil engineering degree, which is a degree that they really value industrial experience. It's part of the whole thing. It's part of do this degree and get a job. About 80% had heard of it, but being quite generous, about a third of them described it incorrectly and less than half described it correctly. So the information isn't getting out there to people who are interested in studying civil engineering about what an apprenticeship is. And that problem must be replicated in all the other subject areas as well. I just can't imagine that if apprenticeships are misunderstood to this cohort, that other cohorts would understand what they are better. Really low numbers of women and people of colour. I appreciate the problem with that phrase, but nobody has come up with a phrase that really helps us say that without causing problems. And people of colour was what I was told to put in when I made this. I've since heard lots of other phrases that perhaps could be used. The interesting thing is how many of them had asked their family. So the people that came to the full-time programme, 40% knew what it was, had asked their family, but lots of people said that school had told them. They're the ones that knew what it was. When we asked the apprenticeship students similar questions, the reasons for doing it were, income, career, we want to work while we're studying, but not work in Tesco. We want to learn while we're doing it, which is great. About half of those were already in employment though, so only half of them were new recruits. Of the people that had joined the programme, 72% of them had asked their family, and only 20% had cited school as a source of knowledge. So the people that are joining apprenticeships do it because their family understand what the higher education sector is, what an apprenticeship is, and that's a real problem. because how there are so many schools in Scotland, how do we get that information out to the schools, exactly what these apprenticeships are and the opportunity that it represents, and the possibility to overcome some of the traditional barriers that you face when you're studying a degree. Problems of money, problems of support, these things are much less intense in terms of an apprenticeship, because you get paid while you do it. You don't have to take a loan. You don't have to pay fees. You have support from your employer as well. So other people who have studied the subject in the past, they will be there to support you as well. So there's a whole different support mechanism and cost to an apprenticeship compared to a full-time program, but people don't understand it. They're not being told what it is and how it works. So we did some focus groups, and I've combined some of our findings from the surveys and the focus groups. The focus groups were really just the apprenticeship students. In terms of time, that's all we could do. But there's an interaction of lots of things causing a lack of diversity in the cohort. So they need a significant other who understands the system. It helps if you have a parent who understands university. That's not a big surprise. But there is a lack of knowledge in the general population about what apprenticeships are and the opportunity that they provide. There was some positive evidence of STEM initiatives. So one of our apprentices had been to lots of things that my colleagues in the department had been running for years about outreach programs for STEM initiatives. So they were fantastic to hear that this person had been through that system. Some of the other people had engaged with some of them, and there is a bit of evidence that is starting to work. So there is a difference made when you launch these things that are designed to help and improve things and spread knowledge. It's very difficult to evaluate them. It's very difficult to know if it's successful or not. But I think there is some evidence that it's starting to work. And I think that actually the success of initiatives where you try and do some kind of outreach program, I think the success of these things are slow and gradual and incremental, and it takes a long time for it to come through. But they are still worth doing, so worth doing, I think. A lot of the problems that we found seem to be problems in schools. So boys were identified earlier as suitable for an apprenticeship. 2 separate classes for career advice were being set up. So one for people who might do an apprenticeship, one for people who might go to university. And the potential degree apprentice people were put into the apprenticeship category rather than the university degree category. Perhaps there shouldn't be a category at all, but there is a lack of understanding about what it is. And I think the word apprenticeship is really problematic here. It's a university degree while you have a job, and it's a subject that's related to your job. But is that a proper apprenticeship? Is it the same as learning how to service a boiler? You know, is it the same as becoming an accountant or some other job where you have to get certain certificates to get to certain stages in your career? I'm not sure the degrees are the same thing. They don't map directly one to the other, despite lots of people's efforts to make them do that. So I think there is a real problem there with understanding the level that people need to be at. Unfortunately, there's still some of the same problems in construction. So remember, this was a civil engineering survey, a civil engineering survey and focus group that we did. So from the focus groups, the same problems for females in construction are there in terms of PPE is designed for men and is massive and baggy and is uncomfortable. Toilets and changing rooms are very male, and there are still problems with that on sites where there is a male toilet and nothing else, which is a problem for industry to solve. That's a problem that I'm surprised came up. I'm not surprised about PPE because the female personal protective equipment is very limited. There are companies that make it, but you don't choose as an employee what company you're ordering your PPE from. So I'm not surprised by that one, but I'm surprised by the changing rooms and toilets and facilities generally on a construction site. That was a problem when I worked in industry starting 14 years ago, well, longer than that, 15 years ago, and it's still a problem now. Unfortunately, there was a male focus group that we did, and male banter was a thing that they brought up. So the female groups that we spoke to weren't aware, but the males on construction site were still aware of problematic language, jokes being made that were completely inappropriate, but they were being made by the men on the site when the females weren't there. So it's still happening. There is still a culture of that inappropriate discussion, inappropriate exclusive jokes being made when the females aren't present. Again, something for industry to work on, perhaps something for universities to work on as well. Something that universities need to get better at were that caring responsibilities were better catered for at work rather than universities. If you work in a university, you'll be aware of the kind of formal structures that people have to get through to be approved to be off university for a while, or to miss out assessments, or to have assessments discounted from the record. They're really formal. And we often ask for things like a GP letter or some other, a police report or something quite severe, quite a high level of evidence required to support someone. Whereas at work, it tends to be much better catered for. So we have exams that are sat at that time and we can't do anything about it to change it. But at work, your caring responsibilities are better catered for. So you can start later or finish earlier or however it works. But in universities, we have a problem of we're assessing people and giving them a grade. So how do we do that more flexibly to allow people with things like caring responsibilities, but also other things that might impact the difficulty of them getting to work or being at work? How do we adapt what we do to better cater for people? And I don't know the answer for that. And I'd be really interested to hear what people think about that and what things we could do in universities to better cater for those grey areas of life where things don't work perfectly and you don't turn up exactly on time and leave exactly on time. Things happen, right? And people with caring responsibilities, that's much worse or much more intense of a problem. Another thing that perhaps for universities to work on is that all of the students felt that the employers were less aware of what the university requirements were in terms of skills. That's something that we need to work on. Now, that was that part of work, which is finished, but not published anywhere. So I'm still to write that up, but I may combine it with what we're doing in the next project. And I'm being offered very kind help from Marco Reggiani at the front table to work this up into publishable stuff. And I'm very grateful for that. So a second round of funding through Ignite, and also using part of the time sort of protected for the fellowship through EDI Plus, is a project to look at a more national scale data set about what's happening on degrees. And I've got a study of full-time students that I can show you to kind of explain what we're trying to look at in terms of data and the degree experience. Because, of course, with a big data set, if we create one, you're going to miss out a lot of the detail, but I can explain a little bit about what we're looking at. The data that I showed earlier was up to 22-23 that was published for the whole of Scotland, and then it stopped being published. So one of the things we need to do is request that data, probably freedom of information request, work on it and publish it, put it somewhere so that people can access it, because we don't know what's happened since then, because it just stopped getting published. What we're hoping to do also is to highlight some of the issues that we report anecdotally. So the initial project that I've done there was based on one program, one cohort. I know anecdotally similar problems exist in other institutions and other subject areas, but I think we need to look at it in a much more data-led way to make the argument that this is happening and to try and persuade colleagues to make a change. Yes, sorry, I'm talking for a long time, sorry. You'll notice the tortured acronym at the top, I persuade. That took me a long time to come up with. I wasn't sure if I was going to submit that. So we're going to collate publicly available data. We're going to create new data as well by contacting universities, and some partners have already signed up to this, but there's probably quite a long way to go in terms of data sharing agreements and the rest, but we all have data in our universities about what's happening to people on the programs. So can we use that data to somehow create a bigger data set across multiple subjects and multiple providers? There are ways to do it, but I need a data expert to do it, and I'm using the funding to employ a researcher for 6 months to look into creating these data sets, and they have experience that I'll show you on the next slide in that department. So I guess to sum up quite quickly, we're looking to evaluate what's been going on and then try and get new data to inform new interventions. I think eventually we will end up going into schools. This is a paper published about Strathclyde students who have a contextual offer. And for those that don't know what that means, from certain postcodes where people perhaps historically haven't attained as high grades, to try and level the playing field a little bit, we make contextual offers. So the entry requirements are slightly reduced to allow people to come in from schools that maybe don't achieve 5 A's all the time. It's quite hard to get into engineering at Strathclyde. So it's one of the ways we try and level the playing field is to make contextual offers, just a slight reduction in the grades. But what this study found is that people who come to Strathclyde over 10 years of data, people who come to Strathclyde with the same qualifications, but from postcode areas which are described as areas of deprivation, they tend to do worse on the programme than the people who come from posh areas. So there are problems there, and we need to think about what we're doing at my institution to support these students. And perhaps as a the opposite side of things, we're doing this work and we want to publish this work. So this is happening in our institution, but we want it to be publicly available to talk about it. So the problems we have, we want to be open. And I think that's a really important thing to get over some of these problems. So I asked employers a few months ago, what should we do? And really they thought these were the things they thought we should be doing. Data on intersectionality is one that I haven't spoken about yet. It's impossible to look at intersectionality with the data we have, but I think that may be something that comes out. There's well over 5,000 students to look at, and I think intersectionality might be something we can study with the big data set. I spoke about how the word apprenticeship is wrong and how we need to improve things in school, in schools, but it's open. We're going to work on this for a long time. So what else can we do? And I'm open to any suggestions. Does anyone have any questions? I'll stop there. Hi. Oh.
Hello, thank you. Hi, I'm Wan. Sorry. Thank you so much for that. That was really interesting. I guess coming from someone who worked in HR analytics for what 10 years, and that was 10 years ago when I left, I'm really just generally quite surprised at how we're still having the same conversations about data and the lack of it, and it's really quite painful to hear. So I'm sorry everyone who still works in this field. One thing that struck me was your dropout rate. It was about 40% that you were taking us through that slide.
Yeah.
Have I misunderstood that 40% of people?
Yeah, it was about 40%. That's nationwide across all subjects.
Is that adjusted for the change in how people approach work in the first place? In that, my understanding of degree apprenticeships is that it's for a number of years and people tend to change their jobs anyway in that time. So
sorry, I didn't hear the last bit.
So people don't tend to stay in the same employer for many, many years anymore. And so therefore, is that part of why people are dropping out and not finishing because they just want to change their employers? Can they transfer to another employer, basically?
Yeah, so are you saying that people tend to change jobs more than perhaps in the past? And is that part of the problem? I think so, yes. I think that there's much greater understanding that there's a bit of power to the person who has the job, and they can change. And people don't feel quite as browbeaten in that they have to stay in that job. So we do have apprentices that move around. Companies, some of them move to a completely different job and don't do the apprenticeship anymore. But I think the main problem is academic achievement. And I think that the main problem is focusing on the work too much, because it's day-to-day success, and the academic stuff takes, at least sort of 12 weeks to complete the module, and then 4 years to complete the program. Let's say you don't get the same immediate satisfaction. So it's easier to leave the university stuff to the side. But that's quite anecdotal. There is another study that is almost ready to be published. The paper's in draft form at the moment, where we've looked at where are they now. So did you change employer? Did you earn more money? Did you complete your program? That kind of thing. So that was nationwide, and it was a survey sent to lots of people. So I've been involved in it, and I think it's coming out soon. So it'll be interesting to see. Yes.
Hi, thank you for that. I'm Sangeeta from Sheffield University. I'm working there as a postdoc on a project that looks at how we can mainstream gender equality and social inclusion in the context of East Africa. And one of our teams are currently conducting similar studies in universities in Malawi, Mozambique, Tanzania, South Africa, and Ethiopia to understand the sort of gender barriers in engineering education. I would like to talk more about it later on, but I think one of my questions was around, were there any studies conducted that focused on the university curriculum itself, and also like the pedagogy that is used, the university culture and the curriculum, how inclusive are they?
Not as part of this, but there is a group that I'm part of called the Apprenticeship Pedagogy Group, and we look at what are we teaching and why are we teaching it. I seem to be the EDI rep on that group, but there is opportunity to look at that. So it'd be good to speak to you in one of the breaks to see what your ideas are around that, because a few years ago we decided we should really get together and talk about what is actually being taught in these programs, because it was sort of you've got a full-time program, make that into an apprenticeship, and is that the right thing? So yeah, it would be good to talk about that.
Thank you so much. I'm Bukola. I'm from the University of York, and I work on a renewable energy project. I'm quite interested in what you said about recruitment, and I think we can talk about this a bit further later as well. But I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about what that process entails and what it looks like in Scotland. So people who are hired, or employees or candidates, do they subsequently apply to universities after being employed at the organization? And then in terms of sort of the tension that you highlighted between the employer's recruitment activities and the university's sort of desires, to what extent is there increasingly, I suppose, collaboration between how the employers are recruiting and the attributes, if you like, or the characteristics of students? Because those can be somewhat different things, because you might need different attributes as an employee and different attributes as a student. And that might be linked to the retention issue as well in universities, because if they're not recruiting students or people with capabilities for learning, then that can affect the retention. And also in terms of EDI, to what extent does the recruitment process sort of consider EDI as an employee and then EDI as a university student as well? Because again, those are slightly different things. So there's tensions there, and I'm wondering how they're being brought together and whether they're even being thought about.
There's probably a very long answer to that, and I don't think I've got time, but generally speaking, EDI is not a big part of the recruitment process, and that's what we've found. So people just are trying to get someone, and for my program, they need to be good at maths. If they're not good at maths, they really struggle, because then all the other subjects struggle because they're concentrating on maths. That you don't need to be good at maths to be an engineer. It's just to reach the professional qualifications, you need certain levels of maths, and it's a very complicated and mixed up picture about what you actually need to be an engineer and what the professional bodies think you need to be an engineer. So there's a lot that goes into it. So it's probably a very long answer. Yes. Thank you.
So thank you.